The Grand Concord station floated in deep space like a jewel made of glass and silver. Ships from hundreds of worlds moved around it in slow, careful lines. Each ship carried leaders, warriors, scholars, and royals. They had all come for one purpose, to attend the Unity Summit, a rare meeting where powerful species discussed peace, trade, and survival. Inside the station, the main diplomatic hall was brighter than daylight. Tall crystal walls curved into a high ceiling filled with soft, glowing light. Long tables stretched across the room in perfect circles, designed so no species would appear above another. Every detail was chosen to prevent offense. Every chair had been placed with care. Among the arriving delegates was Princess Elira of the Velari Empire. The Velari were known across the stars for their elegance and discipline. They valued symmetry in body and mind. Their skin shimmered like polished pearl. Their movements were smooth and balanced. Their voices were calm and controlled. To the galaxy, they represented perfection. But Elira was not like the others. Her left eye carried a silver tone while her right eye glowed faint blue. A faint line ran along one side of her face, a scar from an accident during her youth. When she walked, there was a small delay in one step, so slight that most species would never notice. But the Velari noticed everything. She also felt emotions deeply and did not always hide them well. Among her people, these things were considered weaknesses. Whispers followed her the moment she entered the hall. Some delegates from other species only knew what they had heard, that the Velari princess was flawed, that she was not the ideal heir, that some within her empire doubted her ability to rule. Elira kept her head high. She had trained her entire life for diplomacy. She understood strategy, economics, history, and military command. She had passed every academic trial with high marks, yet none of that mattered to those who only saw what she lacked. The opening ceremony began with calm music played by floating instruments. Delegates took their assigned seats at the grand banquet tables. Though seating was not strictly ordered by rank, most chose carefully. Powerful empires sat beside powerful allies. Trade partners gathered together. One seat near Princess Elira remained empty. It was not officially assigned. It was simply open space beside her. Several delegates glanced toward it, then quietly chose other places. No one wanted to be associated with controversy. No one wanted to risk insulting traditional Velari standards by appearing too friendly with a princess considered imperfect. Elira pretended not to notice. She folded her hands gently on the table and watched the hall fill with color and movement. Tall beings with crystal skin stood beside small, fur-covered diplomats. Some species spoke in musical tones. Others communicated through light pulses. The diversity of life in the galaxy was beautiful, yet the space beside her stayed empty. Then the large doors at the far end of the hall opened again. A human entered. Humans were one of the newer spacefaring species. Only a few decades earlier, they had joined the wider galactic community. At first, many species underestimated them. Humans were physically average compared to many stronger species. They lacked natural armor, claws, or psychic abilities, but what they did possess was something harder to measure: adaptability. The human who entered the hall wore a formal military uniform in dark blue and silver. His name was Commander Daniel Reyes. His posture was relaxed but steady. His dark hair was neatly kept, and his eyes moved calmly across the room, observing everything. He noticed the empty seat. He also noticed why it was empty. Humans were good at reading silent tension. On Earth, they had survived complex social systems, politics, and conflict for thousands of years. A quiet room often spoke louder than noise. Without pausing to calculate status or advantage, Commander Reyes walked across the hall. Several heads turned. He reached the empty seat beside Princess Elira and gently pulled it back. "May I?" he asked politely. Elira blinked in surprise. Her silver and blue eyes met his. "Yes," she replied softly. He sat down. The quiet tension in the air shifted. A few whispers spread like ripples in water. Some delegates watched with curiosity. Others frowned slightly. A few Velari nobles across the hall exchanged careful looks. Reyes offered a small, warm smile. "I apologize for being late. Docking traffic was heavier than expected." Elira studied him. His voice held no hidden meaning, no fear, no mockery. "It is acceptable," she said. "The station is crowded during summits." He nodded and looked around. "It's impressive. I've read reports, but seeing this many species in one room is something else." "You have attended previous summits?" she asked. Only as security support, he said. This is my first as a representative. She tilted her head slightly. You are military. Yes. Is that not unusual for diplomacy? He smiled again. Humans don't separate things as strictly. Sometimes soldiers learn diplomacy better than politicians. For the first time that evening, Elira felt something unexpected. Amusement, it was small but real. Across the table, a delegate from a reptilian species leaned closer to another and whispered something. They both glanced at the human and the princess. Reyes noticed but ignored it. So, he said lightly, what do you think the real challenge of this summit will be? Elira hesitated. Most delegates had approached her cautiously, asking formal questions about Velari trade routes or military strength. None had asked her opinion so directly. Unity, she answered after a moment. Many species speak of cooperation, few truly desire compromise. That sounds familiar, Reyes replied. Humans struggled with that for centuries. You no longer struggle? Oh, we still do, he admitted. But we've learned something important. And that is, that survival matters more than pride. She studied him carefully. The banquet service began, floating trays delivering meals designed for various biological needs. The hall slowly filled with layered conversations. Still, the seat beside Elira was no longer empty. As they ate, Reyes asked her about Velari art and architecture rather than military strength. He asked about her childhood training rather than political tension. He listened carefully, not interrupting. Elira found herself speaking more freely than she expected. I once failed a balance trial, she admitted quietly. Among my people, balance is symbolic of mental and physical harmony. And, Reyes asked, I recovered and completed it later, but records remember failure first. He considered that. On Earth, we celebrate failure sometimes, she blinked. Celebrate? If someone fails and tries again, that's strength. It means they didn't give up. That is unusual. Maybe, he said, but humans wouldn't exist if we waited to be perfect before trying. Across the hall, a group of Velari elders observed the conversation. Some looked displeased. Others seemed thoughtful. One elder turned to another. The human shows no hesitation. Humans rarely do, the second replied. It is their defining trait. Meanwhile, Elira felt a strange lightness in her chest. For years she had felt measured, compared, evaluated. Every movement had been watched for flaws. Yet this human treated her as if she were simply a person. As the evening progressed, a minor debate began at another table regarding trade boundaries near a shared asteroid field. Voices rose slightly, though still controlled. Reyes leaned toward Elira. That discussion won't end quickly. You predict conflict? She asked. I predict stubbornness. She almost smiled again. Would you intervene? She asked. Not unless invited, he replied. Humans learned that giving advice without permission rarely ends well. Wise, he shrugged lightly. We learned the hard way. Later in the evening, music shifted to a softer tone. Delegates moved between tables, forming new conversations. A tall, insect-like diplomat approached Elira but paused when noticing Reyes. Princess, the diplomat said carefully. May I inquire why you sit with the human military representative? The question carried polite wording but hidden judgment. Elira felt the familiar pressure rise within her, the expectation to justify herself. Before she could answer, Reyes spoke calmly. I requested the seat, he said. The princess was kind enough to allow it. The diplomat studied him. You understand Velari tradition? Only what I've read, Reyes replied, but I understand loneliness. The insect diplomat seemed confused. Loneliness. Reyes gestured subtly toward the once empty seat. I noticed no one else sat here. Silence followed. Elira's heart beat faster. No one had ever spoken of it so openly. The diplomat shifted slightly. Diplomatic caution is not loneliness. Maybe not, Reyes said gently. But sometimes caution hides fear. The insect diplomat offered no reply and eventually moved away. Elira turned toward the human. You risk political discomfort. He met her gaze. Humans risk discomfort every day. It's how we grow. She considered that deeply. As the banquet neared its end, the hall lights dimmed slightly, signaling transition to formal discussions the next day. Delegates began departing in organized lines. Before standing, Reyes looked at Elira. For what it's worth, I'm glad I chose this seat. She felt warmth rise within her, not embarrassment, but gratitude. As am I, she replied. They stood together. Across the hall, more eyes watched than before, but the looks were different now. Some carried curiosity instead of judgment. Some held quiet respect. The empty chair had become a symbol. Outside the hall in the wide corridor lined with starlit windows, Elira paused. "Commander Reyes," she said. "Daniel is fine," he replied. "Daniel," she corrected softly. "Why did you truly sit beside me?" He looked out at the stars for a moment before answering. "When humans first joined the galactic community, many species saw us as unstable, too emotional, too unpredictable. We weren't perfect enough." She listened carefully. "If someone had refused to sit beside us," he continued, "we might never have earned trust, so when I saw that seat, I thought maybe it's my turn to make the first move." Elira felt her throat tighten slightly. "Among my people," she said slowly, "imperfection is weakness." "On Earth," he replied, "imperfection is proof you survived something." She looked at the faint scar on her reflection in the window glass. For the first time in many years, she did not see failure. She saw survival. Behind them, distant whispers still moved through the station. Political calculations were already forming. Some would not approve of this growing connection. Some would attempt to use it. But in that quiet corridor filled with starlight, none of that mattered. A simple choice had shifted the atmosphere of the summit, not through power. Not through force, but through something far more human. The next day would bring negotiations, tension, and unexpected challenges. Yet the memory of an empty seat and the courage to fill it would remain. And across the vast hall of the Grand Conquered, many would remember the moment when a human sat beside a princess everyone else avoided, and nothing in the room felt quite the same again. The morning sun, or what passed for sun on the artificial lighting of Grand Conquered. Station shone gently through the crystalline walls of the central council chamber. Delegates moved carefully, some in elegant robes, others in tight uniforms, each step precise, each movement measured. The air was thick with anticipation, curiosity, and subtle tension. The previous night's banquet had left ripples of conversation that would shape the day's negotiations. Princess Elira arrived early, her posture straight, her silver and blue eyes scanning the room. The hall had been transformed since the banquet. Circular tables had been arranged to allow small discussions, and walls displayed holographic maps of contested sectors. Various species were already gathered, whispering quietly among themselves, their voices blending into an almost musical hum. Elira's mind raced with the tasks ahead. Diplomacy was never simple, and she knew that today the stakes were even higher. Commander Daniel Reyes entered moments later, his human frame unassuming yet firm. Unlike most, he did not approach with careful calculation. His eyes, dark and observant, moved from face to face, noting subtle shifts in posture and glances that others might have missed. Humans, he had learned, often thrived in chaos, not perfection, and in a room filled with beings who measured every move, that ability was an asset. As he reached Elira's side, she gave a small nod of greeting. "The chamber is crowded already." "Do you think this summit will go smoothly?" she asked. He shrugged, a small smile appearing. "I doubt it, but smooth is rarely productive. The real progress comes when people clash and adapt." Elira studied him. He was human, yes, and humans were known for unpredictability. But he also carried a calmness that few species could maintain. It was strange, almost comforting. She found herself willing to trust him, despite knowing that the galaxy rarely rewarded trust lightly. Their first session involved the Astara-Hellion dispute. The Astara claimed mining rights to a cluster of asteroids rich in a rare mineral essential for starship engines. Hellion argued that the same cluster had belonged to their ancestors for generations and demanded full control. Diplomats of both sides spoke in careful, technical terms, yet the arguments quickly revealed deeper rivalries. Words, it seemed, were often a mask for older grudges. Elira listened quietly, her mind analyzing, noting patterns, inconsistencies, and the unspoken signals that others often missed. Reyes, seated beside her, leaned slightly forward. "They aren't listening to reason yet," he whispered. "They're rehearsing old battles." She nodded. "Exactly. If we appeal only to their pride, the talks will stall for weeks." "Then let's try something different," he said, eyes gleaming with the faint spark of human optimism. "Why not appeal to survival instead of pride? If the Astara and Hellion understand that collaboration keeps both alive, they might listen." Elira tilted her head. "It's risky." "Everything worthwhile is," he said lightly. When the debate reached a stalemate, Elira stood. Her voice, calm but firm, carried through the chamber. Leaders of Astara and Hellion, she began, you speak of rights and ancestry, but the universe will not wait for disputes to settle. Meteors fall, pirates raid, and resources run thin. Cooperation ensures that both your peoples survive. Pride alone cannot protect your citizens from the dangers beyond these walls. Whispers ran through the room. Some delegates looked surprised, others intrigued. The words were simple, yet the message was clear. Survival mattered more than old arguments. Reyes leaned closer. You see, truth resonates differently when spoken plainly. The Astara and Hellion leaders exchanged uncertain glances. The rest of the chamber was silent, absorbing the directness of her speech. Slowly, murmurs of agreement began. A preliminary compromise was proposed. Shared mining rights with a rotation schedule, monitored by neutral species. Neither side could claim complete victory, but both could survive. Elira allowed herself a small, private smile. Progress, she realized, often came when courage outweighed protocol. After the session ended, the delegates dispersed to smaller discussions. Some sought advice, others tried to manipulate alliances quietly. Elira and Reyes walked together along the wide corridor that overlooked the spaceport bay, streams of starlight glittering like diamonds around the station. You handled that well, Reyes said. They'll talk about this compromise for weeks. She exhaled softly. I only suggested what seemed reasonable. You helped me see how to speak it without angering them. Humans had a strange talent for cutting through layers of protocol. Elira knew that. Their willingness to risk offense for clarity was both terrifying and admirable. As they continued, an unexpected challenge emerged. A holographic alert flashed across the corridor displays. Security sensors had detected an unauthorized energy surge in one of the upper environmental decks. The surge risked shutting down life support in several sections, potentially trapping delegates. Immediately, Elira's instincts took over. Her training in crisis management had been extensive. She gestured to Reyes. We need to assess this. Follow me. They moved swiftly through the corridors, the metallic floor humming beneath their feet. Other security teams were already mobilizing, but their movements were cautious, weighed down by protocol and fear of causing offense to high-ranking delegates. Reyes, by contrast, acted decisively, suggesting paths and strategies to contain the situation. When they reached the affected deck, the scene was tense. Energy lines pulsed erratically. Several environmental control panels flickered dangerously. Elira accessed the nearest console, analyzing the surge's source. It appears deliberate, she said. Someone wanted to disrupt the summit. Reyes frowned. Sabotage? Likely, she replied. The question is why and who. Together, they coordinated a plan to stabilize the system. Elira managed technical controls with precision, while Reyes directed human security teams to reroute energy safely. Other species watched, some stepping forward, others hesitant. The combination of Velari knowledge and human decisiveness created an efficiency no single species could match. After tense minutes, the environmental deck stabilized. The surge stopped, and life support returned to normal. Delegates trapped in isolated areas were guided safely out. There were no injuries, though the potential had been great. The incident caused a stir across the station. Rumors spread rapidly. Was it an accident? Was it a warning? Or was it an attempt to sabotage specific delegates? Elira knew the answers were not simple. Political rivals would attempt to exploit fear. Some might blame her personally, citing her imperfections as distractions during the crisis. Others would question why a human commander had such influence in response decisions. Elira turned to Reyes. You handled yourself well, but I fear some will not appreciate it. He shrugged. They'll appreciate results eventually. Fear is temporary, survival is permanent. Across the corridors, whispers and observations intensified. Delegates who had once avoided Elira now paused to watch her interactions. Her perceived flaws, the differences that had made her isolated, were now seen in a different light. She acted decisively, balanced intellect with empathy, and collaborated without arrogance. Later, in a quiet chamber, Elira and Reyes debriefed. She reviewed the security logs, noting patterns in energy fluctuations that suggested deliberate interference. Someone wanted to create panic, she said, and perhaps to frame me or my people. They hoped no one would act decisively beside me. Reyes leaned against the wall. They underestimated you, and maybe underestimated humans too. When you combine skill with courage, the outcome surprises them. She studied him carefully. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but in this unpredictability she saw honesty. They did not hide their thoughts to manipulate or impress. What they said was often what they meant. It was a quality she both admired and found strange. The next sessions were more complicated. Debate over trade rights, environmental policies, and security alliances stretched into hours. Elira's influence grew. Delegates from species that had once whispered about her imperfections now consulted her openly. They noticed that her emotional awareness allowed her to read other leaders accurately, anticipating reactions and countering arguments subtly. Reyes remained at her side, providing input only when necessary. His human logic often complemented her Velaryon intuition. Where she saw cultural nuance, he saw patterns and potential outcomes. Together, they became an unexpectedly effective team. By evening, the station's public communications were filled with reports of her decisive action during the environmental crisis and her calm, measured handling of complex negotiations. Stories of the flawed princess, who acted heroically alongside a human commander, circulated among smaller species, inspiring discussions about trust, courage, and the value of collaboration. Some factions attempted to discredit her, using whispers and subtle hints that she was unpredictable, unstable, or overly emotional. Elira, however, had learned from humans the power of reframing perception. During a council briefing, she spoke openly about her decisions during the crisis, highlighting strategy, teamwork, and the importance of learning from mistakes rather than hiding them. Her words struck a chord. Delegates began to reconsider long-held prejudices. Imperfection, they realized, could coexist with competence and wisdom. Flaws did not imply weakness. Sometimes they revealed strength. Later that night, Elira walked along a quieter observation deck, gazing at the stars beyond the station. The galaxy stretched infinitely, filled with possibilities and dangers alike. She felt a sense of hope, fragile but real. Reyes joined her moments later. "You're thinking about the summit, aren't you?" he asked softly. She nodded. "And the people who still judge me before knowing me," he smiled faintly. "Let them watch. In time, actions speak louder than assumptions," she exhaled. "I never realized how exhausting it was to live as a symbol instead of a person." "That's true for many species," he replied. "Humans included, but people who act honestly, who take risks for survival and growth, they change how others see the world. You did that today." Elira studied her reflection in the glass. Her eyes, mismatched and vivid, glimmered in the starlight. For the first time, she saw them not as a flaw, but as a part of her story. "The galaxy will be watching," she said quietly. "And learning," he said, "some faster than others." A soft hum passed through the station as ships docked, lights pulsed, and distant voices echoed. Outside, the stars remained eternal and indifferent, yet somehow comforting. Elira realized that survival, courage, and collaboration were stronger than fear, judgment, or rigid ideals. The summit was far from over. Challenges would come, both political and dangerous. Rivals would attempt manipulation, and sabotage might strike again. Yet she also knew that with the right allies, including humans like Daniel Reyes, she could face the trials ahead. The empty seat from the banquet was no longer empty. It had become a symbol of choice, courage, and the beginning of change. And as the night deepened, Elira felt a quiet strength settle within her, the knowledge that her actions, not her perceived flaws, would define her legacy. Tomorrow, the summit would continue, and the galaxy would watch. But tonight, Elira allowed herself a small moment of quiet pride. She had survived the first true test, not by being perfect, but by being herself, aided by a human who had chosen to see past expectations. And across the corridors of the Grand Concord, whispers had shifted from judgment to fascination. Some delegates still doubted her, some still watched cautiously, but many could not ignore the undeniable fact. Princess Elira, the flawed heir, had shown courage, insight, and decisiveness the galaxy had not expected. And the human who had simply chosen to sit beside her had changed everything. The next morning, the galactic Concord station was alive with energy. Delegates moved swiftly between council chambers, private meeting rooms, and observation decks. Every species seemed alert, eyes scanning, ears tuned, anticipating both opportunity and threat. The previous day's events, the environmental crisis and Princess Elira's decisive handling, had already stirred debate, curiosity, and admiration. Rumors spread like fire through the corridors. A flawed princess who acted boldly, guided by a human commander, had prevented disaster. Some whispered of heroism, others muttered warnings, uncertain if her actions were reckless or inspired. Elira entered the main council hall with calm determination. Her mismatched eyes, one silver and one soft blue, caught the light of the overhead panels. For a moment she paused, studying the room filled with hundreds of delegates. Each represented a powerful empire, each carried their own agendas and ambitions. In past years, she had entered similar halls and felt anxiety twisting in her chest. But now, something had changed. The presence of Daniel Reyes, the human who had sat beside her when no one else would, had shifted more than perception. It had shifted her confidence. Reyes appeared moments later, slipping in beside her as he had done the previous day. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, noticing subtle gestures, the way some delegates leaned in slightly and others kept arms crossed, tension coiled in every muscle. Humans were trained to read situations quickly. In a space where politeness masked power and diplomacy masked strategy, every movement told a story. "Today will be harder," Elira said quietly. Reyes nodded. "That's the point of summits. If it were easy, it wouldn't matter." Her lips pressed into a thin line, thinking of the challenges ahead. Today, the summit would reach a turning point. The factions that had quietly tried to undermine her yesterday would attempt more direct measures. Political rivals often used fear and prejudice as tools. Her perceived flaws were an easy target, a convenient excuse for delegations wishing to discredit her without overt confrontation. The first session involved the Panthari and Korani delegates. A dispute over the control of strategic wormhole routes had persisted for centuries. Both species valued honor above survival, and neither would yield. Their leaders spoke in long, measured statements, each word designed to assert dominance. Silence stretched as Elira listened, noting the hidden signals of anger and respect in every gesture. "Notice how they repeat the same phrases," Reyes whispered. "They are rehearsing old arguments, not thinking about outcomes." "Yes," she replied, "their pride is stronger than reason." Together, they prepared to intervene. Elira would speak first, appealing to reason and survival. Reyes would offer strategic insight from a human perspective. When she stood to address the chamber, her voice carried clearly, steady, and measured. "Leaders of Panthari and Korani," she said, "the universe is not static. Stars collapse, systems are born, resources shift. You claim rights over a route that spans light years, but without cooperation, both your peoples risk isolation, economic collapse, and loss of life. Honor is important, yes, but survival is essential." Murmurs ran through the hall, some delegates stiffened. Others tilted their heads, intrigued. Elira continued, "I understand that compromise may feel like weakness, but compromise can create strength stronger than pride. A route shared wisely ensures that both species thrive. If you focus on survival, you protect the legacy of your ancestors better than endless argument ever could." The room fell silent. Delegates who had once whispered behind her back now regarded her with cautious interest. She stepped down, allowing Reyes to speak. He addressed the assembly simply. "Humans have a saying," he began, "that winning sometimes means knowing when to give. I've seen species fight over pride and lose everything that mattered. What you do today determines whether your people thrive tomorrow." The simplicity of his words carried weight. Humans often underestimated the power of plain truth, but in diplomacy, directness could cut through centuries of arrogance. By the end of the session, preliminary agreements were forming. The Panthari and Korani agreed to a shared management plan for the wormhole routes, with oversight by neutral observers. Neither side fully won, but both had ensured survival and prosperity for their peoples. Elira felt a quiet satisfaction. The strategy had worked, action and honesty triumphing over pretense. As they moved between meetings, news arrived of another sabotage attempt. This time, energy conduits leading to life support in the southern sectors were disrupted. Panic rippled among junior delegates. Some species had never faced failure so directly in front of peers. Others, more cautious, froze, unsure whether to act without instruction. Elira and Reyes rushed to the scene, coordinating with station security. The corridors were tense, filled with the hum of alarms and distant shouts. They reached the affected sectors where the lights flickered and vents hissed. Elira accessed the main console, tracing the surge to a tampered conduit. "Deliberate," she said. Someone wants fear to dominate this summit. Their target is any vulnerable position. Reyes studied her. Or anyone perceived as vulnerable, he said softly. Like a princess considered flawed. Elira nodded, lips pressed firmly. We must act quickly. If this spreads, delegations could panic. Alliances might collapse. Together, they coordinated a team of security personnel and technical experts from multiple species. Elira handled the technical diagnostics with precision, while Reyes directed the teams with calm authority. Where other commanders hesitated, they acted. Delegates trapped in the affected sectors were guided to safety, the life support systems stabilized, and the saboteurs' attempts were temporarily contained. The crisis revealed several truths. Many species, previously wary of Elira, now recognized her competence under pressure. Humans, despite their differences, could act decisively and without concern for protocol in emergencies. The combination of her Velari training and his human instinct became a force the saboteurs had not anticipated. Back in the main hall, news of their actions spread quickly. Rumors, once skeptical or mocking, shifted. Delegates whispered not of flaws or differences, but of courage, insight, and collaboration. Those who had previously avoided her began approaching, asking questions, seeking guidance. Elira realized that perception, long considered her enemy, had begun to change. Later, Elira and Reyes reviewed the station logs, searching for the origin of the sabotage. Clues emerged suggesting the acts were orchestrated by extremists hoping to provoke distrust and conflict. Their plan had relied on fear and prejudice. But Elira's and Reyes' actions had thwarted the immediate threat. You see, Reyes said quietly, courage and action change perceptions faster than words alone. Yes, she replied, and imperfection is no longer a weakness if we act decisively. Throughout the afternoon, the summit continued with growing momentum. Delegations became more open to collaboration, influenced not only by her speeches, but by the tangible proof of competence during crises. Elira observed each discussion carefully, offering guidance where appropriate, encouraging compromise without yielding authority. Her perceived flaws, emotions, a slight imbalance in posture, the visible scar on her face, now seemed to humanize her, making other species relate to her more than ever before. By evening, the final council session began. The extremists behind the sabotage had been identified, though not all their allies. Some delegates attempted to shift blame toward Elira, implying her supposed unpredictability had caused the near disasters. Others tried subtle hints suggesting that the human commander had undue influence. Elira, now standing confidently at the council podium, addressed the chamber. Her voice was calm but commanding. The events of these past days have revealed a truth. Leadership is not determined by perfection, appearances, or rigid traditions. Leadership is measured by the ability to protect, to adapt, and to act in the best interest of those you serve. Mistakes, flaws, and differences are not weaknesses. They are evidence of survival, resilience, and experience. Those who exploit fear to divide us fail to see that strength comes from courage, honesty, and collaboration. The chamber was silent, then erupted into applause and murmurs of agreement. Some delegates who had once whispered criticism nodded in acknowledgement. Many species began openly discussing policies to prevent future sabotage, inspired by the example of Elira and the human who had supported her. Reyes, standing beside her, spoke briefly. Humans have a saying, what we do defines us, not what we appear to be. You've proven this principle here. Elira smiled faintly. And you have taught me that courage can be shared, not imposed. As the summit concluded, formal treaties were signed. The Panthari and Korani agreed to shared wormhole management. Astara and Hellion finalized cooperative mining arrangements. Security protocols were strengthened, not to restrict freedom, but to protect life. Delegates began to leave, but whispers of the flawed princess, who had faced danger, acted decisively, and collaborated with a human to save lives would spread throughout the galaxy for years. In a quiet observation chamber, Elira looked out at the endless stars. She thought of the empty seat at the banquet, the whispers, the cautious avoidance, and the moment when a human chose to sit beside her without fear. That single act had changed everything. It had altered perceptions, inspired courage, and demonstrated that differences, when embraced, could become strength. Reyes joined her, leaning slightly against the rail. The summit is over, he said softly, but this is just the beginning. She nodded. The galaxy will not forget what happened here. And perhaps, he added, they will remember that sometimes a small act of courage changes the course of history. Elira's eyes, mismatched yet luminous, reflected starlight. We survived not because we were perfect, but because we acted. Exactly, he said, and that's something every species can learn. The station hummed with life around them, but for a moment, time seemed still. In that stillness, Elira understood something vital. Strength was not measured by perfection, but by courage, resilience, and the willingness to act for the greater good. Across the galactic Concord, stories began to spread. Not stories of her flaws, not stories of her past mistakes, but stories of a princess who faced fear, collaborated with the unexpected, and showed the galaxy that imperfection could be the greatest form of strength. And as Elira turned to leave the observation deck with Daniel Reyes by her side, she knew that the future of the galaxy had been shaped not by titles, appearances, or expectation, but by action, courage, and the choice to see potential where others saw only flaws. The summit had ended, but the legacy of that day, of a human who sat beside a princess no one else dared to approach, would endure across stars, systems, and generations. It would become a tale of hope, of humanity, and of the power that comes when differences are embraced rather than feared. Princess Elira, once defined by what she lacked, now stood as proof that survival, courage, and wisdom mattered far more than perfection. And humanity, represented in Daniel Reyes, had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the simplest choices, like choosing to sit beside someone who is avoided, can change everything. The stars outside the station continued to shimmer, endless and eternal. And within them, the seeds of a new era had been planted. An era where differences were not shunned, courage was celebrated, and the strength of the human spirit, and the choices it inspired, could reshape the galaxy forever.